These are all reasonable, prudent financial moves. But they trigger an income spike that the IRS reports to the SSA. And 2 years later, you are hit with earmark surcharges that add thousands of dollars to your healthcare costs, precisely when your medical expenses are likely to rise. The system does not warn you when the income spike occurs. It does not send a friendly reminder saying, by the way, this extra $50,000 you just withdrew might cost you an extra $400 a month in Medicare premiums in 2 years. It just waits. And then the bill arrives. If this information is starting to make you see your retirement planning in a completely different light, if you are realizing that the biggest threats to your financial security are not the obvious ones but the invisible ones buried in regulatory code, I ask you to leave your like on this video right now. It lets me know that you value this kind of deep, protective knowledge that cuts through the noise and shows you what is actually happening behind the curtain. Let me walk you deeper into the engine room of how the IRS, the banks, and the Federal Reserve have created a world where your savings account is no longer a quiet place of refuge, but a monitored asset that is constantly being evaluated for extraction opportunities. The Federal Reserve's interest rate policy over the last several years has fundamentally changed how the IRS calculates underpayment and late payment penalties. For much of the 2010s, the federal funds rate was near zero, and the IRS penalty rate hovered around 3 or 4%. That was manageable. You could make a mistake, take a few months to sort it out, and the interest cost was not devastating. Today, with rates pushed to fight inflation, the IRS underpayment rate stands at 8% compounded daily. Compounded daily. That means every single day you have an unresolved tax debt, the government adds more to your balance, and that interest itself starts earning interest. If you underpay your taxes by $10,000 and it takes you 1 year to resolve the issue, you don't just owe $10,000. You owe roughly $10,830. That 8% rate is higher than the return you can get on a high-yield savings account, higher than most certificates of deposit. The government becomes your most expensive creditor, and it achieves this not by some legislative debate in Congress that you could have followed on C-SPAN, but by a formula that quietly adjusts with the Federal Reserve's decisions. Most people never realize that the interest rate on their tax debt is tied to the same macroeconomic forces that drive mortgage rates and credit card APRs. They are blindsided when a relatively small tax bill balloons into something that takes years to pay off. And the collection tools that the IRS now has are far more powerful and automated than they were even 5 years ago. The agency can levy your Social Security benefits directly, taking a portion of your monthly check before it even reaches your bank account. Under the Federal Payment Levy Program, the IRS can garnish up to 15% of your Social Security payments for past due tax debts, and this process is increasingly automated. You do not get a court hearing. You get a notice in the mail, and if you do not respond in time, the levy kicks in automatically. For a retiree living on $2,000 a month, losing $300 a month to a tax levy is not a minor inconvenience. It is the difference between paying the electric bill and letting it go past due. It is the difference between buying the prescribed medication and cutting pills in half. And the system does not care about your personal budget. It calculates the levy percentage based on a formula, applies it, and sends the remainder to your account. The only way to stop it is to prove financial hardship using Form 433A, a collection information statement that requires you to disclose every asset, every expense, every bank account down to the penny. You essentially have to lay your entire financial life bare to the same agency that is taking your money, hoping they will show you mercy. And the backlog in processing those hardship requests can take months, during which the levy continues. The banks are playing a parallel game that compounds this pressure. Over the last decade, the banking industry has closed thousands of physical branches, especially in rural and lower-income areas. The stated reason is the shift to digital banking, but there is a silent consequence that benefits both the banks and the agencies that monitor financial activity. When you can no longer walk into a branch and withdraw a large sum of cash over the counter with a friendly teller who knows your name, you are forced to transact electronically. Electronic transactions create a permanent, searchable record. Every Zelle transfer, every Venmo payment, every ACH deposit is logged with a timestamp, an IP address, a geolocation stamp, and a counterparty identifier. That data is stored by the bank and is accessible to the IRS through a simple summons that no longer requires the same level of judicial oversight it once did. The IRS can issue an administrative summons to a bank for account records, and the bank is legally required to comply, often without notifying the account holder. The first time you learn that your bank records were turned over to the IRS is when a notice of deficiency arrives in the mail citing specific transactions you thought were private. This is not a conspiracy. It is the legal framework established by the Internal Revenue Code and the Bank Secrecy Act, and it is being executed with a speed and efficiency that would have been impossible before the digitization of banking. I want you to think about the person who has done everything right, the person who spent 30 years working for a county government or a school district, who saved in a 403B or a 457 plan, who bought the modest house in a quiet neighborhood, who drove the same car for 12 years and never carried credit card debt. That person is now in their late 60s, and they are watching their carefully constructed world start to feel fragile. Not because they made bad investments, not because they were reckless, but because the rules of the game changed while they were playing it, and nobody gave them an updated rulebook. They are told that their Social Security is safe, but they find out that up to 85% of it can be taxable if their combined income crosses a threshold that hasn't been adjusted for inflation in a meaningful way for decades. The thresholds for taxing Social Security were set in 1983 and 1993. A single filer with a combined income of more than $34,000 can have up to 85% of their Social Security taxed at ordinary rates. $34,000 in 1993 is equivalent to about $72,000 today. The threshold has not been indexed to inflation, meaning that every year, more and more middle-class retirees are pushed into the taxable zone simply because the dollar has lost purchasing power. The system is designed to appear static, while inflation does the dirty work of expanding the tax base. Nobody votes on this. Nobody debates it on the floor of Congress. It just happens, year after year, while the buying power of your Social Security check silently shrinks. And here is a parallel shock that I need to walk you through because it affects almost anyone who has a retirement account, especially those who are in their early 70s and facing required minimum distributions. The Secure Act and Secure 2.0 change the age at which RMDs must begin, pushing it to 73 and eventually to 75. But the penalty for missing an RMD remains one of the most brutal provisions in the tax code. If you fail to withdraw the required amount from your traditional IRA or 401k, the penalty is 25% of the amount you should have withdrawn. 25%. If your RMD was supposed to be $20,000 and you only withdrew $10,000, you face a penalty of $2,500 on top of the taxes you still owe on the unwithdrawn amount. The penalty can be reduced to 10% if you correct it quickly, but the window for that correction is narrow, and the process requires filing Form 5329 and writing a letter of reasonable cause explaining why you missed it. Many retirees are managing multiple accounts, a 401k from a former employer, a traditional IRA at a brokerage, a 403b from a part-time teaching job they held for a few years in their 50s. Each account requires its own RMD calculation, and while you can aggregate IRA RMDs, you cannot aggregate 401k RMDs across different employers. Each plan must distribute separately. The IRS algorithm, of course, knows exactly what your RMD should be because it receives Form 5498 data from custodians and knows your age from Social Security records. If your total distributions fall short, the machine flags the shortfall. You then receive a notice proposing the penalty, and the burden falls on you to prove you made a good faith effort to comply. The complexity is the trap. The system makes it so easy to trip and so hard to get back up. Let me pause here and ask you directly. In the comments below, tell me if you have ever dealt with a required minimum distribution, or if you are approaching that age and feeling uncertain about how to handle it. Your comment helps everyone here see that they are not alone in navigating these waters. And it reminds me that these deep dives into the mechanics of retirement taxation are actually reaching the people who need them most. Now, we need to talk about credit scores and the way they have quietly become a backdoor tax collection enforcement tool. For most of your life, you probably viewed your credit report as something that mattered when you applied for a mortgage or a car loan. You paid your bills, you kept your balances low, you assumed your credit score was a reflection of your private financial behavior, separate from your tax life. That assumption is no longer valid. When the IRS files a notice of federal tax lien, which it can do if you owe more than $10,000 and have not arranged a payment plan, that lien becomes a public record. It is filed with the county recorder's office where you live, and it is immediately picked up by the automated